I've definitely been in that situation where I feel like there was no hope and I was just destined to another cycle of poverty, like a generational poverty. If anything, I'm a testament that it is absolutely possible to crawl out of the depths from literally the worst situation imaginable and to succeed and to be living a meaningful and happy life.
Welcome to the Engineer Podcast. That's engineer with a Jen, because I'm your podcast host, Jen. Now, this is a platform meant to add more soul to your STEM career. If you're a STEM student studying in nonstop stress, then listen to Jen's solo-style episodes where she uses her 5-year engineering degree to teach the inner work that you can do to study from soul rather than stress. And if you're a STEM student seriously questioning your career path, then listen to Jen interview previous engineers who switched from the traditional and aligned with the more soul-centered career field. Now follow me out of the fog and into your future. Let's listen in. Hello, everybody! How are you doing today? I'm so happy that you clicked on this episode because I could not be more honored to showcase Jorge's story on my platform. It is by far one of the most inspirational stories I have ever heard in my life. Full disclaimer, when I summarized it to my mom, she hasn't even listened to it, she started crying because this really truly hit home for her. A little bit of backstory. Jorge graduated from Rice University with an electrical engineering degree. For those who aren't familiar, Rice University is a very prestigious engineering school in Texas. He graduated there cum laude, which means with honors, but prior to reaching that achievement, he lived at the poverty line. He was living paycheck to paycheck, worrying about his basic needs from undocumented parents, constantly growing up with the fear of them being deported, not understanding if they were going to have their basic needs met. And as the oldest of his siblings, he felt the responsibility to really help and take care of his family just at the young age of 15 and 16. That led him to consider even dropping out of high school, but there was a massive miracle that reached his life at that time to help him become the electrical engineer that he ended up becoming. Now, typically the story ends there, right? Typically it's like struggle, engineer, that's the solution to your life, that's the yay, happy story. Well, not on this podcast. As you guys know, my podcast is all about adding more soul to your STEM career, people who have moved on to more soul-aligned jobs, and that is what Jorge has done. He has literally gone from electrical engineer to real estate industry to now reaching the position that he's currently in, which combines both of them as a technical sales engineer, as well as a passion page on Instagram called Mindfully Conscious. He has become an authority figure in the neuroscience brain coaching space and industry with over 10,000 followers on his page because of his knowledge of how the brain works and how to utilize it to its full potential. Because Jorge is such an expert at what he's talked about, and because he has gone through so much adversity and made it through to the other side of that adversity, we literally spoke for over 2 hours. I had a lot of content, I had a lot of conversation, and I just didn't think it fit in one episode entirely. So his story is actually split into 2 different segments. Segment 1 is all about his personal journey and his career pivots. And then segment 2 is him diving into his expertise of the brain and offering our audience free tips, free coaching, if you will, in that area. So after you listen to his story in depth, you better go on to episode 2 so that you could learn about his coaching, learn about his book, and get free tips on how to manage your stress as a student. Okay? Why don't we get started? Hi, everyone. This is the Engineer Podcast, and today we have Jorge. Jorge, say hi.
Hi, everybody. How are y'all doing?
And I'm actually going to have Jorge introduce himself. So can you just give us a small, brief self-introduction of where you're currently at in your STEM journey, a little bit about your background and what you do.
Yes, so my name is Jorge Quintero. I'm currently working as a technical sales engineer for an Israeli company called Alpha Omega. They provide products that are used in a particular kind of surgery called deep brain stimulation surgery. And this surgery is special because it's kind of used as a last resort for patients that have Parkinson's disease, essential tremor, and dystonia. They've tried all the treatments, they've tried all the therapy, it's not working for them. They are completely debilitated in terms of what they can do functionally. And so the kind of like the last resort for them is to undergo this surgery and to get an implantable pacemaker or implantable lead or wire in their brain that just shocks a dysfunctional part of the brain and relieves them of their symptoms. So we provide the technology that makes that surgery happen in about 4 hours. So it's pretty life-changing. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm an electrical engineer by trade, but I don't really do any engineering anymore. It's more sales and more customer support.
Yeah, so we're going to dive all into that, a little bit about Jorge. He was an electrical engineer, and now this is the job that he's in. So I kind of want to go back to high school, back to where this all started, back to your childhood. How did you end up in electrical engineering? Where is that origin story for you?
Yeah. So just like most people that pursue an engineering degree, a lot of the pressure came from my parents wanting me to have a white collar job that could really just provide stability. Because as a child, I did not have really any stability financially, and my parents were living paycheck to paycheck. They essentially just wanted myself and my siblings to just do really well at school and to pick a profession that would guarantee us to kind of break that cycle that they were living. Like they didn't know how to change their own situation, so they looked at us and they wanted to inspire us through their suffering and through their struggles to not live the same reality as them. I was really interested in art from a very young age, probably since the age of 5 to around 16, where I was really considering what I wanted to do for a living. I had some teachers that kind of approached me that were in the art department that wanted me to become an artist, and they wanted me to really develop that creative ability. I told my parents that,
And they were
and
like, psych.
yep. They were like, stop that right now. You don't
Yeah.
know what you're talking about. How are you going to eat? Just look at how we're struggling and we're actually providing value and this and that.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they were just like, that's out. And they helped me explore some options. They had an uncle talk to me who kind of works with architects, and he has like a PE license.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would always tell me like, look how great your uncle's doing. Why don't you want to do something like that? So I actually considered like modeling and architecture and stuff like that, but I actually really hated it. But the high school that I went to had like these different departments. So it had like an architecture department, it had an electronics department, it had kind of like a manufacturing department where it would really teach you some pretty practical and some good tech STEM skills. So I didn't like the architecture. I decided to try what was called digital electronics, and there's a whole strand for that. And I was really good at it. Like when I took the classes, the teacher immediately noticed that I could just really understand really abstract and really difficult concepts, because you can't visualize electricity, right? You can't visualize
That's
voltage
very
very
true.
easily and current.
The
It's not like,
first C I ever got in undergrad was in electromagnetism. So I know what you're talking about.
yeah, it's not an easy subject, but it was something that I thought was super interesting. It was like this whole new world to me. And this teacher, his name is Mr. Abraham, he really wanted me to pursue electrical engineering, and he kind of fostered me, and he basically created a whole different curriculum that was more advanced just so that I could be interested and I wasn't bored in class. So he went above and beyond for me to really allow me to explore the field of electronics and the option of becoming an electrical engineer. And it was at that point that I felt like I wanted to become an engineer, especially an electrical engineer.
So he really empowered you to see your own potential He was like, I see something in this kid, and I'm gonna make sure that he sees it in himself to start going after this goal. I want you to dive a little deeper into your family and your family situation a little bit so people kind of understand where that choice is
Hmm.
also coming from. To my understanding, you're a first generation college student, correct?
So my parents did get their college degrees in Mexico, but yes, I am the first generation to get an American college degree.
What did your parents do, and how did that transition when they came from Mexico to the United States?
Yeah, so my dad actually had a master's in agricultural engineering. So my dad is an engineer also.
Mm,
Um, but you don't really hear agricultural engineering in the States. I think they just call it like FFA or something, like Future
mm.
Farmers Association, or it's not the same thing. My mom, she had a bachelor's degree in what was tourism and education, so she had like a double degree, and she was actually a teacher. My dad actually had a lot of trouble getting employment after he got his master's degree, and at the time, I think Ronald Reagan was president, and
Yes.
that's when like a ton of Latinos came over to the United States, and my parents were two of those individuals that came in 1990. But what they realized was that their degrees weren't worth anything here. You have to revalidate your degrees, and you have to pay a lot of money. So what my parents ended up doing, my mom was kind of just like a stay-at-home wife. I think she just like maintained the apartment or wherever they lived. But my dad was actually picking up some technical skills in like machining and manufacturing, and he was able to get a pretty decent income, kind of running some factory machines and stuff. Like you program them, and they're supposed to like cut parts into very precise measurements and things like that. And it was in demand then, and they were able to kind of sustain themselves on that.
Yeah, so when you spoke about the Ronald Reagan, the reason why I was like, yes, that's actually when my mom and her siblings got here as well in the United States. And so I know exactly what you're talking about and what time frame and what kind of drew them to come here at that time.
Yeah,
Um,
but an interesting thing about my parents, though, is that they were not able to get their citizenship. It wasn't until I turned 21. So I wasn't even born yet at this time. It wasn't until I turned 21 that my parents were able to become documented immigrants or residents.
Legal residents,
So,
yeah.
yeah, legal residents. So my entire childhood was spent with the fear of my parents getting deported and us
Mm,
getting separated from them, you know? And because they were undocumented, as immigration laws became stricter, they lost more and more opportunities for employment. So it literally got to the point where my mom was able to work at a school initially, kind of as a teacher aide, and my dad was in this industry of manufacturing. But over time, my dad actually was no longer able to get those jobs in machining, and he became a janitor. And my
mm,
mom started cleaning houses for like really rich folk, and she had multiple houses that she would go to, and she would make pretty small amount of money actually every 2 weeks, and we basically subsisted off of that. So you can imagine like maybe one minimum wage job or a little bit more than minimum wage plus less than minimum wage to support a family of five. And that's really the family environment that I grew up in.
yeah. Now I can fully understand why your parents are like, please do engineering. So,
Yeah, so they initially came with the intention of doing well themselves. But because of the political climate, because of just like, there's a ton of factors, but everything kind of combined itself into the reality that I had to live. And my parents didn't know how to get out of it. They didn't see the option of getting more opportunities or making more money, or, not risking themselves too much so that they have a potential of getting deported. It was a lot to consider, and it was very difficult for everybody that was in my family. But yeah, they essentially said, we can't do anything about this, but you guys can. You guys were born here.
mhm,
And so they really pushed us to have that white collar job.
right. Are you the oldest of your siblings?
I am the oldest, so I'm 25. My sister, who's the next youngest, she's 23, and then I have a brother that's 20 years old.
Got it. So I also wonder for you what it was like to be the oldest. You're the one who understands the situation the most. You're the firstborn, you're the male of the family. Like, how did that feel on you growing up, seeing your parents being the oldest of your siblings?
Yeah, so I had to take a lot of emotional baggage because my mom, whenever she was really stressing out, because my parents would obviously argue over money all the time. And whenever she felt like my dad wasn't understanding and she couldn't get through to my dad, she would look to me. At this time, I was probably like in my early teens, and she would just kind of let everything out. She would just cry. She would kind of just want someone to listen to her, and I would be the one to listen to my mom. So it was really hard because I had to be kind of like a support, not only for my siblings, because they didn't really know what was going on, but
Yeah.
I also had to be support for my parents. And one thing that I haven't mentioned yet that just kind of throws another wrench into this whole mix is that, like, because my parents were undocumented, they couldn't travel back to Mexico where most of their family was.
Is, yeah.
So when I was 10 years old, my grandma on my dad's side actually passed away, and my dad was not able to be there during
Ugh,
like the wake and the funeral. So I remember this really vividly, actually, because it was probably the turning point where things just starting to get worse in my life.
mm-hmm.
My dad, I just remember looking out into the backyard. My dad, he had like this axe that he was just literally hammering into a tree, like really angry. And you could tell that he just couldn't take it. Like he was losing his mind. And
Yeah.
I think he actually did lose his mind, because I don't remember when he was diagnosed, but it was shortly after that he was diagnosed not only with major depressive disorder, but also psychosis, which is a kind of like a form of schizophrenia.
Mm,
So that caused him to be very, very unable to keep a job. And so my mom essentially had to step up and start working a lot more. A lot more stress was brought on her. And she looked at me now as the man of the house, because
yeah. That's what I figured.
my dad could not handle himself. You know, you can yell at him so many times. You can tell him to get off his ass and work a job. But for people that suffer from depression, it's not that easy. You know, it's not that
Right.
easy for you to just get those messages and tell yourself, all right, you know what, I'm just going to get out of bed and do exactly what I need to do. You know, it's even hard for a regular person to do that. So, you know, from a very young age, I had to just step up. And I turned, right before I turned 16, I was able to get my first job working at a
Mm,
go-kart track. And I was maybe making like $8, 8.50 an hour. I don't remember which of the two it was, but my whole paycheck would go to my mom, and I was still going to school.
right.
And it was just so that we could reduce that uncertainty that was existing in our lives, so we could just make it another 2 weeks. That was the goal for us. It wasn't, okay, let's see what's going to happen next year, or let's start planning for when you're going to go to college. It was, we need to figure out what we're going to do for the
For
next
the
two
next two
weeks
weeks. Wow. I can't even imagine the pressure that you were feeling and the emotions that you were going through at 16. So you have that job, you're working paycheck to paycheck, giving your money away to your family every 2 weeks to try to sustain your household. And then you get to the point where you're even considering dropping out of school.
Yeah, so now that we're at the point where I'm working a full-time job, I
Oh,
was
wait,
maybe
it was
starting.
full time? It wasn't part
Well,
time?
sorry, it was part-time at first, but it turned into full-time, and I'll talk about this right now.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
So it started off with about 20 hours a week, and I was still going to high school. Keep in mind that I'm a GT/AP student, so I'm not getting
Oh,
like regular
shit.
coursework. Yeah, I'm trying to do the best that I possibly can to get into a good university. So I was going to school, literally getting home, like eating a really quick meal, maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes, leaving right to work, getting back home around 10, and then doing homework that I had to do for the next day. And my mom, she would ask me like, why are you working so hard? Like, you need to stop worrying about like the money aspect. Like, you need to focus on school, because to her, that's her dream. Like, all of her sacrifices were for me to go to a good school and to get a good degree. And I told her, I was like, I'm doing all these things because I care about everything, you know, like I want to be a good student. I want to be a provider for you guys because I know you really need it. So what I started doing is I started working even more hours because my mom, she would tell me that what she was making was not enough. She was saying like, okay, I'm working like these 5 different houses, but it's still not enough money. Your dad's not working. My dad was actually, we sent him off to the hospital because he was off his meds and he didn't want to take them. And it was just causing way more problems. So it was just me, myself and my mom just kind of strategizing about what we were going to do. I started working more hours. It still wasn't enough. Like at that point, it was over 30 hours. So it was full time. I was leaving school early to be able to work the hours that I was scheduled for. And it got to a certain point where I couldn't even stay awake in class. You know, I was just having my head down and I was feeling like absolute crap because it seemed like I was just in a very powerless position, right? Like I had no credentials. I had no real marketable skills. I was 16 years old. I had to be emotionally strong for not only my siblings, but my mom also. It was just a really difficult time. And at that point, I just considered like this idea that I should just drop out of high school because the most important thing was the well-being of my family. You know, like I couldn't let my family
values.
Yeah, I couldn't just let my family just suffer. So I was pretty decided about it until that electronics teacher, he notices that I'm just kind of down and feeling like I'm not myself in the class.
Yeah, especially if you're saying your typical performance is an honors AP student, like your caliber is usually at a high bar. And I'm sure he noticed right away, like,
he noticed it and he pulled me aside and he's like, "What's going on with you? I know you're not doing okay." And I just broke down to him. He was the first teacher that actually asked me, and I broke down. I told him everything, and he would just kind of was speechless. Like I think he just hugged me and told me that everything was going to be okay. And the next day he pulls, like I had his class again, so he pulls me over to his office and he kind of just tells me that he had a conversation with his daughter, and his daughter started crying about the kind of story that he told him about me. His daughter started crying because she said that she had never heard her dad so sad before. Yeah, it was really emotional for him. And so he said that he kind of just like he knew what he had to do, and he told me, "I know that you feel like you're about to drop out, so I'm going to make you a deal, and whatever you decide to do, you just have to promise me this one thing." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "I wrote this check for like, I don't remember the exact amount of money, but it was thousands of dollars. And I think I'm just going to put a number on it. I'm going to say $5,000. And he said, I'm going to let you have this check of $5,000 and you can use this to pay like your bills for, I don't know how long, but it'll be enough to get through this struggle. But if you take this check, you have to promise me that you're going to become an electrical engineer." And he's the guy that really believed in me and really wanted me to become this electrical engineer. And I didn't even hesitate. I just told him it's a deal. I need this money more than everything. That was absolutely a turning point for me. Like that was probably right before the bottom of the bottom. I remember just, holding, like looking at that check and just shaking. Like I couldn't believe what was in my hands. And I took it to my mom and she started bawling too. Like she was like, "I can't believe he did this. We can't take this money. It's not ours. Like this is so much. We can't take it." And I said, "Well, he's already written it. Let's just keep it here. And if we feel like we absolutely need it, we'll cash it. Let's just use it as motivation. We can do this." And we just left it. We left it on the kitchen table and we never touched it. We never cashed that check. And it was after that moment that things just started to get better. Like my dad, he just had like some inspiration, I guess, or like some insight where he was like, "You know what? I'm doing so much damage to my family. I need to work. I need to get my mind off of things. I just need to start getting better." He started getting on his medication. He started calming down and he was able to get out of the hospital and he started looking for employment.
Did your dad
My
have any
mom,
idea about the check? when he made that decision?
We didn't really tell him. We just really told him that we needed his help like as much as possible. I guess it was like a strategic play on our end, because if we told him that we had money, who knows how much longer he would have wanted to drag it out, or what kind of interpretation he would have had of that.
Mm-hmm.
So we just kind of, I guess, manipulated him into wanting to work again. He came back. He felt a lot better. He absolutely hates the hospital. So he knew that if he didn't take his medication, we were just going to send him right back, and he didn't want that. So I was able to cut my hours because of that. My dad started working again, and like the whole situation stabilized. But I would say that for a whole nother year after that, I was not the same. I dropped all of my AP classes from my senior year. I told myself, screw class rank. I was actually number 2 at the time.
In your
I was
whole high
number
school?
Yeah, I was number 2, and I did graduate number 2, but I didn't take any AP classes my senior year. My senior year, I just decided to just chill, just have the time of my life, not have to worry about anything. And I absolutely needed that, because my junior year of high school was like literally hellish. I don't know how it could have gotten worse. Maybe if I literally dropped out of high school.
Yeah.
But Mr. Abraham, that electronics teacher, I kind of see him as like an angel, right? Like he was there at literally the perfect time and at the perfect moment, that like his inspiration and his hope and his belief in me was literally not only turned around my situation, it turned the situation around for my entire family. I was so thankful to him that I knew for sure that I was going to become an electrical engineer, and I did become one. I kept my promise, and he was there at my graduation, and he took the graduation cap from me. He said, "This was my doing, so I'm actually the one graduating."
I love that. Oh my god, I love that he did that. So what, I mean, you just gave me a lot. I actually have so many questions. You said you guys didn't even cash that check.
We didn't.
So to me, like that money was just energy. Like that
It
money
literally
was just
was.
like the motivation, the energy, the faith, the hope for your family to feel like we can do this. We have
Hmm.
God on our side. We have this man as our angel who's showing us that we're going to be okay. It almost gave you guys like
Of
this
relief.
drive. Yeah, relief. You could like exhale a little bit and not be so tense and living in fear all the time. Like you guys didn't even cash it. It was just the act itself to know that you're being supported made such a huge difference on your mental state and your mental capacity to live life.
Absolutely. And just as a side note, this teacher, Mr. Abraham, he's also a pastor, and he built his own church scratch. So this guy is like a really big believer of God, and the way that he mentors his students is really Christian like. And I'm almost positive that he knew just how strong the power of belief is, and he knew that he just had to do that as a child of God, or someone that follows in the footsteps of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And it's absolutely undeniable what kind of effect that had on my family. Like that's something that I'm never going to forget ever. And it also pulled me out of like the deepest hole of my entire life.
And you literally ended up graduating with an electrical engineering degree from, it was Rice University. I would love for you to speak on how that experience was for you and what you did after graduation.
So I got into Rice University, which is a pretty selective private school in Houston, Texas, where I grew up in. And my first year, I think I had a pretty heavy dose of imposter syndrome. Like I came from
Mm,
a pretty underprivileged, under-resourced high school that was like in a very ghetto community.
okay.
And so it was very low income, very economically disadvantaged. And I felt like I was sharing like textbooks and homework with people that came from all these different private schools, from literally the best schools all over the world. It's not just the US, it's people from China, people from Europe, people from South Africa, from Australia.
Fuck.
And
I did not
yeah,
realize that.
and in my high school, I was a majority. I was not a minority. Like the population was split evenly between African Americans and Latinos. So I went from that environment feeling very comfortable and feeling like everybody that I met I could identify with,
Yeah.
because we were all going through the same things, to literally being a minority, not being able to relate at all to these people.
Yeah.
And so I felt pretty alone the first, I would say pretty much throughout my entire undergrad degree. I felt like I couldn't really connect with many people. I have a few friends that I still keep in touch with now, but I actually now still hang around with mostly with my high school friends. So I had that imposter syndrome. I absolutely loved my degree. I had an absolute blast learning electrical engineering. I was that really nerdy kid that would always sit in the front, always had questions to ask. I would go to office hours all the time. I wanted to start homework as soon as it was assigned. I wouldn't wait till the night before. And you won't believe this, but in my entire undergrad career, I only spent one all nighter where I
One
didn't
all
sleep at
nighter?
all.
Did
Only
you
one.
graduate in 4 years?
I graduated in 4 years.
Ooh. Oh my goodness. I wish I could say that. The only thing I can say is that I don't drink caffeine, so I at least survived undergrad without caffeine, but not without all-nighters. That shows that it was a really strong priority for you.
It was, and I was really focused. I was able to finish all my academic activities, including working on homework, by 8 p.m. pretty much every night. And I made sure that my nights were always just for hanging out and spending time with others.
Wow.
So it was a pretty great experience in that regard. I did really well in my major. I graduated with honors, cum laude with my degree. And because I went through so much adversity as an adolescent, I
Mm-hmm.
would see people kind of break and crack under the pressure of exams and homework, and I was just doing perfectly okay. I had to deal with the pressure of being a minority and feeling that kind of that distance from people, but I definitely did not feel the same stress to the extent that people felt with exams and everything like that, mostly because I had a good work ethic and also because I had gone through way worse.
Yeah.
It's like that perspective that kept me in check.
It was like as once you knew what you had gone through, you were like, I know I can get through this. This is cake.
Exactly. And that's what I would tell myself every single time. I would tell myself, look, you're complaining about this thing, but literally 3 years ago, you were in the worst possible situation and you got out of it.
Hmm.
There's ways to overcome this. And that always kept my head like just level headed.
Wow. I mean, I can't say the same. School stress got to me. But I think I can just tell already, like from what you've shown me, community, your relationships with others is a really key factor that you value. And I know that that's one of the factors that kind of led you out of engineering because it wasn't fulfilling that value for you. So, can you kind of speak on your transition from graduating to a full time job and what your experience was in your full time job?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting story because if I just kind of go over the high points or like the highlights, it seems very random. So just to start this off, I do want to give like the quick summary. So I started off getting a job doing design and research and development for a Taiwanese company that had an office in Houston, and they designed memory for consumer electronics. So you visualize the chips in your like computer and your in the motherboard and in your laptop, and I was designing those from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely hated that job because it was not challenging. Not that it can't be challenging. My particular role was not challenging, and it just wasn't fulfilling. Like I couldn't connect with the people that were working in the same office. They were at least like 15 years older than me. They were all fathers that had kids that were about 10 years old or greater.
Mm.
They were just in a completely different stage of life. So I couldn't really connect with them. I didn't like the work that I was doing. So I was just miserable. And then to top it all off, I just understood that I couldn't be in an office all day. I think I liked my major so much because it had a lot of variety. Like you would go to a
Mm.
class 1 hour, then go to another class another hour. You would have lunch with a bunch of people that were your age. You would go back to your dorm and hang out with the people in your dorm. You could go to the library and study in the library. It's just a lot of variety. But
Yeah.
whenever you go to the office, you spend 8 hours there. You come home, you spend like 3 hours doing everything else. You sleep, and then you just repeat that
Repeat it.
process.
Mm-hmm.
It lost a lot of its magic for me. And I remember that what kind of did it and what kind of cemented like this dislike for my career was I was kind of expecting to make a lot more money than I was going to get on my first paycheck. And I remember waking up
Mm.
super excited because the first direct deposit hit. I open up the Chase app
And you're
and I look at
disappointed.
and I was so disappointed. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I worked so hard for
You're
to,
like, I just
to
did
earn.
all those hours miserably to get that monetary value.
It's so don't get me wrong. It was honestly more money than someone my age needs, but I felt like I was entitled to something greater. Like I had
Yeah.
suffered so much that I deserved more.
And that's
And
fully valid. Like understanding
mhm,
what you had gone through, the milestones that you had reached, and like how this was supposed to be like the solution to your life. Like, right? Like you grew up believing like electro engineering is the solution to my life. That is what is going to get me out of my place. So I can totally understand when you would get that money value and then it doesn't energetically match what you had been anticipating for years, literally years.
yeah, and remember, like I come from a place where I had no money, so I wanted to have as much money as possible. I had the mindset that I wanted to be this rich guy that could retire early and could do whatever he wants when he wants and have all expenses paid for.
Got it.
But you know, like this tension that I was feeling with my job really kind of chipped away at me, and it was so unsatisfying that you're not going to believe this, but I ended up getting another engineering job on top of that. And I was working for a startup 28 plus hours a week, trying to get this startup off the ground so that I could quit my main job and do something that was more challenging. So I figured maybe what I need is a more challenging environment, right? Like
Hmm.
I just studied 4 years for this degree. I don't want to just throw it away right now. Let me see if there's a potential for me to make a bigger impact, be more challenged, be around people that are my age, and see how
Yeah.
that goes. And what ended up happening over time was like, yes, it started off great, but each of the three guys that were part of the startup, myself, a classmate, and then somebody else that graduated with like a bioengineering degree,
Hmm.
we all had full-time jobs because we were taking an idea from its concept stage to its prototype stage. And we had kind of give a basic overview of what the idea was. It was like a smart sleeve for baseball pitchers, and it could detect when they would be fatigued during practice. It could tell
Yeah.
you when they had the wrong form in their pitch. It would do a lot. So we were working on it, and then I figured out down the road that these guys just weren't serious about it. Like I was working harder than
Mm.
both of them, and they didn't want to give me any equity. Like
What?
we were taking, yeah, they were taking, they did want to give me some equity, but it was like very small. They essentially like gave me the promise that they were going to pay me equity, but they just had to kind of get these contracts ready. I was working my butt off trying to get this thing off the ground because I had a strong hatred for my full-time job,
Yeah.
and I wanted this startup to take off. But once they gave me the contract and they showed me that they were only trying to give me 3% equity when they didn't have any revenue, any prototype. I was literally working to turn their idea into a seven-figure business.
Right.
We had people that were interested, like literally MLB teams are willing to invest millions of dollars into this project if we could just show them that we had a minimally functioning prototype. And these guys were just not on top of it. And so that was a slap on the face for me. I just also didn't get good energy from having to work harder than the CEO and the CTO. Like that just didn't cut it for me. So I ended up dropping that. And what I started doing was I started looking at potential entrepreneurship opportunities that I could, pursue, because
Mm.
I realized that I just can't work for somebody.
Yeah.
Like the reason why my full-time job is unchallenging is because I have to wait on people, and like my tasks are super basic. And then on the other end, I was working at a startup where I was working harder than the CEO and the CTO. So it kind of gave me this
Yeah.
impression that I just needed to do my own thing because otherwise I would not be satisfied.
Right.
So I started reading a lot of books. I read a bunch of self-help books like Think and Grow Rich, Charles Duhigg's book on habits, a bunch of other books on real estate and investing. And one thing in particular that fascinated me about real estate, because I was looking at growing my money because I had a good amount of it,
Yeah.
was this small niche called wholesaling.
Okay.
And what the niche is it's you're essentially just doing all the sales and marketing in the transaction. So you're looking for properties that are a little beat up or maybe really beat up, and you're trying to contact the homeowner and negotiate a price that will be beneficial for both the homeowner and the investor that's going to invest the money in the project.
Yeah,
And
you're
you kind
like
of
the
get,
liaison.
yes, you're the middleman and you're getting paid on that spread. So you can get the property at one price and then sell the contract at a higher price to the investor. You make the money on the spread. And there's stories of people making stupid amounts of money, like 100,000 on stuff
On
like
what?
that.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this looks like something that I can do. I'm an electrical engineer. I literally graduated from one of the most difficult colleges in America. I got this. I can do this. Man, I could not have been more wrong. So, for anybody that is
I'm
considering making
sorry.
a drastic switch like this, understand that technical skills do not translate into social skills. And that was a naive thing that I kind of had to learn the hard way. But to go back to the story, I decided to start this real estate business. And I started it at the beginning of 2018. So this is 2 years ago, January of
Mhm.
2018. And I promised myself that for my first business, I would give myself 1 year to just try as
Go
hard as
all
I
in.
can and go, not necessarily go all in, but just give it enough time so that it could develop, or that I can solve issues and solve my failures and eventually become successful in the business. And no matter what happened, I couldn't figure out the business. Like, I had all the mentors, I had all the connections, I had all the information. I knew what to do. I did all the marketing. I spent a ton of money just trying to like streamline the process and allow me to focus on issues that I just felt like were holding my business back, and I just could not get it to work. So after about, I think it was 16 months working at my full-time job as an engineer, I
Mhm.
quit cold turkey, and I had 6 months of income saved up. And I told like, I think it was around August, the end of August, I told myself for the rest of the year, I'm gonna go all in. I'm gonna work my butt off to get this business to work. And at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, I know that I still have my degree to fall back on and I can get another job. So that's what gave me a little bit of comfort, was this idea that I was
Wow.
still very employable as a 23, 24-year old,
Right.
and that I could take this risk right now. So I went all in. I burned the bridges, as they say. And guess what happened? I still failed. I was I promise you, I was cold calling people hours every single day,
Yeah.
trying to just get a hold of homeowners and trying to negotiate deals with them. And don't get me wrong, cold calling is absolutely really difficult activity to do consistently, because before you pick up the phone, you don't know what these people are going to tell you. And trust
Yeah.
me, I've been cussed out a lot of times over the phone. So it's not an easy thing to do, but it's like I have to. Otherwise, I'm going to go
You're
back
not
to
gonna
the
make
old
any money.
reality. Yeah, otherwise I'm going to go back to the old reality that I didn't want to go back to. But lo and behold, in January of 2019, I was broke, I was unemployed, and I was out of business.
Ugh.
I
Oh.
took the risk, and it did not pay off for me. And I could have told myself, you know what, sales and marketing and entrepreneurship are just not for me. But that's not what I told myself. I told myself, you know what, I just need to get better at sales. I need to learn from somebody. Like, I need to be in a structured environment that allows me to develop these skills that I'm seeking, and maybe I can try this again in the future. So I did some reflection. I actually took a vacation to Mexico to kind of think about things a bit. I thought to myself, okay, what can I do here so that I guarantee that my next opportunity, whatever it is a lot more pleasant for me.
Yeah.
One, I absolutely hated the structured environment of going to an office every day, dealing with the same people all the time, and then coming back home and like losing literally an hour and a half in commute time also. I didn't like that. I didn't like the emotional aspect of real estate, where you were dealing with people in very difficult situations. Like, they were in
Mhm.
foreclosure, they're behind on their taxes, they're a family member just passed away. The house is like falling apart, but they still have an attachment to it. Like they're not easy situations, which is why a wholesaler is valuable. But I didn't want to be in that kind of sales environment either. Like I wanted something that was a little bit more logical, a little bit more level-headed. Like I could really just focus on trying to develop the skills of sales and not necessarily being in kind of like this stressful environment, dealing with stressed out people, and then also doing marketing that causes me stress.
Right.
So so I was like, okay, what did I like? I liked the fact that I like dealing with logical people. I like dealing with engineers, but I don't like being in an office with them all the time. I like going outside and like I did in real estate and just hearing people's stories, getting to know new individuals on a consistent basis. I really like that. And so I did some research and I found an opportunity or opportunities in technical sales that literally combines the two. It's the sales version of engineering. You essentially just use your degree to understand the technology that the company is selling, and then the rest is just sales and marketing. So I thought it was very appealing, and I started applying to jobs in that niche or in that industry, and I got a couple of interviews, and I ended up deciding on the opportunity that I have now, which is doing sales, but for I would say it's a pretty electrical engineering based company. It's like a brain recording technology that records electrical activity in the brain. And I just sell that and I support that. And because of that introspection, because of those risks, that kind of tension that I've experienced in all of my different working experiences, I'm more happy than ever now. Like I'm not making much more money than I was, or actually now I am. I'm making about six figures now. And before I was only making about maybe 70K as a design engineer. It's not much. It is a big difference, but really what made me happy was just finding an environment I felt comfortable in. And I felt like I wanted to learn the things that were being taught, and I wanted to grow in that direction. And I think one of the things that I wish I could tell myself at an earlier time, and I tell this to everybody that I talk to, we always get asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? But we never get asked, what do you want your life to be like when you're working? You know, that's such a key thing, is like, just because you want to be a doctor, does your personality fit being a doctor? Like, are you okay being,
at the
only
whim
talking
of
to
your
people for
patients?
like, at the whim of your patients, and only interacting with them for 10 minutes at a time and doing the same thing over and over? Or are you someone that wants more novelty and more unpredictability? Are you someone that's okay being in these social situations, or would you rather just be behind a computer screen? Like, these are things that you have to ask yourself, because the reality isn't the degree and the coursework. The reality is the 50 plus years that await you after you
choose
get
that
your degree.
Something that I really want to highlight that you did during that time was you didn't just internalize like, oh, I'm a failure. You had a really, what I see as like a growth mindset about it, and you intentionally took the time to reflect on, okay, what can I do? What does this mean about myself and what I value? And what other jobs are there that match what I value? And had you not done that, you wouldn't have done your research to look up the job that you're currently in. And I think that alone can just be inspiring to people. Like, the words that you tell yourself after a sense of failure completely predict the trajectory that you're going to take.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, we tell ourselves things that make sense. And there's tons of ways of making sense of one particular event in our lives, right? That's the whole reason why beliefs are so subjective, because you can give it any meaning that you want. Do you want to give yourself a meaning that limits you and that kind of puts you in a box that's going to cause you to suffer more? Or would you rather sacrifice maybe a little bit discomfort for a huge potential upside, which is the potential upside of something going well and something being better than you could have possibly imagined? Like, if I didn't ask myself those questions about how could I make my next experience better, I would not be in the position that I'm in right now.
Exactly. And I think also too, like, something that I had a lot of fear around was taking a break from my degree. Like, once I knew that it wasn't what I wanted, I still had no idea what I did want. And because I had that fear of the unknown, I just kept going down this line that I was familiar with, even though I knew I wasn't happy with it. And I think what you did was you took that break to Mexico, like you pressed pause and you didn't have a direction yet. You took the time to figure it out. And I think that's something that people can really learn from, that I could learn from had I done that in the past, to kind of like, you know what, Jen, you know, you don't like this, take a pause and figure it out. But I had so much fear about like pausing that goal. So I just went with it and continued. And had I heard someone's story like yours, I feel like maybe my decisions or my mindset would have been different. And so that's why I'm so passionate about sharing your kind of story on this platform for the people like me that needed to hear it a few years ago.
Yeah. And an interesting thing about what you just said, Jana, about kind of going down this path of certainty, because it's what you most know that it's going to like give you exactly what you know is going to come, right? I don't know if
Exactly.
I said that. I don't know if I said this right, but there's always going to be a risk with uncertainty and exploration. But I think that to find your purpose and to find meaning and something that just brings you genuine happiness, it absolutely requires exploration. And I want to highlight one thing that I said in this last part of my story about kind of thinking about what would be the opportunity that would be pleasant for me, right? I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know that it was going to be pleasant. I just made a best guess based on what I know about myself and what I know about what I've already experienced. And that's I think a foolproof way that people can eventually find meaning and purpose in their life, even if it doesn't happen immediately. Like if you repeat this process over and over, what happens is like you're going to make a pivot and then you might need to make another pivot, but it's not going to be as drastic. And over
Yeah.
time, you just start refining it little by little until you literally find the path that you're like, yes, I can dedicate my full life to this. And I absolutely love working in this space. And I can't see myself doing anything else. It's a process. Like none of us are born with these answers. For everybody to find that purpose, it absolutely requires exploration. And there just comes a point where you have to make a decision. You have to just have a certain limit of how much you can take, right? If you're really unhappy in your current circumstances and you're feeling just as unhappy now as you did like 2 or 3 months ago, that's a pretty strong indication that things are not going to change. And you have one of two options. You can stay in that same comfortable path even though it brings you misery, or you can potentially risk a little more misery doing something else that you don't know will work. But like I said, there's always a potential that you will like it more.
I want to start talking about what I perceive as your side hustle. So, the reason why I found you and started to talk to you and now have you on my podcast is because I found you on Instagram at Mindfully Conscious, where you give amazing lessons on understanding your brain and how to program it in a way that serves you in the highest way possible. So, I really want you to kind of talk about where that started and where that has gone now since you started.
Yeah, I can't believe I went a whole hour without talking about my Instagram page, but it's literally my lifeblood now. Like I love it so much that I can't imagine myself without it anymore. And the way that it started was because of my current role as a technical sales engineer for this company that I work for. And what happened was I got trained for maybe a few weeks. They told me a little bit about the procedure, about the technology. I got to play hands-on with the system itself. And then they sent me on my very first case. I don't remember where it was exactly, but I just remember kind of being present in the surgery. You look at the patient come in, they're trembling, like their hands are shaking uncontrollably.
Yeah.
They can't really do anything about it. They can't really speak. If they stick their tongue out, their tongue is shaking, so they can't even talk.
Yeah.
And then within 4 hours, they put the patient on a bed. They kind of take x-rays of the patient's brain to kind of say, okay, we're going to target this one brain area and we're going to come in through this part of the skull and we're going to go in a straight line to this area. And they're trying to like dodge a lot of veins and stuff because they don't want internal bleeding. So it's kind of like this like
Holy
matrix game
crap.
where you're trying to just dodge like really important parts of the brain, but you're also trying to get to this very small point. Once they've made that plan, they go ahead and they shave the patient's head. They mark where they're going to enter, and they go ahead and they make an incision. They drill into the skull and they expose the brain. So at this point, the patient is awake. Keep in mind, the patient is awake this whole surgery, and they have a hole in their skull now with their brain exposed. Yep. Personally, I would be so anxious in that situation. And also, just to make matters worse, they're completely fixed. So their head is fixed because it's such a precise procedure, right, that they can't afford for the coordinates to mess up because the head moves. So they drill screws into the patient's skull that attaches to a frame, and the frame is secured to the bed so the frame doesn't move at all, and your head is fixed. Yeah. They go ahead and put our equipment on, which is like a motor that's going to drive the wire or the electrode that's going to record brain activity, kind of make sure that we're on the right trajectory that we planned before. And once we get to the point that we want, we start shocking them and we start testing them in the OR. This is where it really changed my life, because as soon as we turned on the shocks and we started stimulating the part of the brain that is responsible for these tremors and this like malfunctioning of the way that people move, you stop seeing all of the symptoms, and you see the light in the patient's eyes just light up. Like you see a renewed life come into this person, because the issue is that they lack this one particular neurochemical called dopamine, which is responsible for motivation. It's responsible for euphoria, for the ability to move fluidly. Without these things, these people are emotionless. They can't move, and they're just completely dependent on others. And in 4 hours, they're able to make a complete 180 shift. They can speak again. They're so happy. They're able to move and control their movements again. It's absolutely life-changing. And when I saw this, I was like, holy crap, what is going on here? I absolutely have no idea how any of this works. I need to learn more. I want to understand it. Wow, that's like a modern day miracle. I can't even imagine what it's like to witness that happen. It's pretty incredible, and everybody that witnesses it has this like wow moment when they first see it, because it defies like any kind of common person understanding, because it's just like, how does shocks have an effect on like literally this person's entire being? But it does, and we can talk about how the brain works a little bit later. But I started reading books about how the brain works, and I was just really inspired. I was super inspired because I started connecting a lot of the concepts that I learned in real estate, which is about mindset, about beliefs, about goal setting, about your behavior and your habits and all of that. And I started seeing the connection to the neuroscience, to the brain science. And it was like a light bulb moment where I was like, wow, is anybody writing about this right now? Like, I want to know kind of like this connection, because I've always been someone that always wants to improve, and I always want to get better, but I didn't find anything. Like, I found books that kind of surveyed brain science, and they talk about at a high level, like the history of how they kind of determined how brain areas work and all that, but nothing that was kind of tying it to a practical level. And at this point, I started thinking, man, this could be a really good idea for myself to start. Like, if I start putting out these messages and kind of putting out this content, it would be a first. But then I told myself, but who am I to do that? Like, I literally just started working. I started, I've only been learning this for a few months. Who am I to do this? I'm not an expert in the neuroscience space. I'm not an expert. And I was debating it for like weeks. And then I had this crazy dream that I also will never forget. And in the dream, it was just a really basic dream, but I just don't understand why it had the impact that it did. I just dreamt of, like, I was floating up into the sky, and then I kind of appeared in front of a hooded lady, and she had a black robe, black hood. I couldn't really see her face, but I knew she was a woman. And I just stared at her, and she just looked at me. And in the dream, this hooded lady told me that I absolutely had to use my skills to really just help others understand that they can change, they can grow, and they can become more positive individuals if they understand how their brain works and how everything is just like interconnected. So I started for like, I would say for about 2 months, I just couldn't get the thought out of my head of just starting my page and creating an impact. And that's what ultimately pushed me to just get over my self-doubt and to just do it. It wasn't because I didn't have self-doubt. It was because I couldn't get the thought out of my head that I needed to do this. And it all happened after that dream, which is really bizarre. But I'm super happy that I did, because now it's about a year anniversary since I started my page. I started with 60 followers. It's grown to a community of 8,000 people. It's absolutely life-changing for not only myself, but for some of the people that have reached out to me on Instagram. I've met people from all over the world that have given me crazy stories and this positive feedback that keeps me going. And it's become this activity that is just so self-rewarding that I just can't stop doing it. Like, I can't stop putting out more content. I can't stop answering people's messages and trying to help out. I can't stop thinking about how I'm going to continue growing this platform and trying to impact more people in practical ways. Like, it has a life of its own now.
It's
And
starting to become
it's just
bigger than
constantly.
just you.
Exactly. And I would have never guessed this a year ago. Like, this was just me trying to, one, kind of build my own understanding of the brain, and two, just kind of put simple messages out there that were tied to brain science that anybody could understand. And hopefully, that was my thought. Hopefully someone would benefit from it.
This kind of reminds me, I don't know if you've ever heard this quote, but it says something along the lines of like, God doesn't call the people who are qualified, he qualifies the people who are called. It was almost like you didn't feel qualified, but you were 100% called to talk on this topic. And like, you became qualified as it was happening.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic message that you just said, because I do remember in my dream that this hooded lady told me that because I had sales experience, even if I don't consider myself a great salesman right now, I did have the ability to communicate. I had technical skills so I could understand the science, and I was in a good position to combine those two skills plus my creative side, because I was in art for like 10 years, and
Right.
just start a project that combined those things and really, as you said, kind of stepped up to the calling that I was given. And through the process, I've become an individual that people want to ask questions to about the brain, even if I'm not a neuroscientist, right? Right now I'm a coach. I'm starting to move into coaching, but I didn't get a degree in neuroscience. My degree is in electrical engineering, but it was just the passion to continue learning and to serve others that has given me the strong foundation in neuroscience. I've gotten to the point where I have the basics down. I have a good foundation. I can actually start synthesizing original ideas and trying to create bigger impacts that way.
Okay, everyone, that's the end of segment 1. Go ahead and go to segment 2. It's already published, ready and waiting for you. And get some free brain coaching tips from Jorge, as well as check out what's coming up in his new book.